In 80 Days, adventurer and award-winning filmmaker Paul G. Roberts retraces the global footsteps of Phileas Fogg, hero of Jules Verne's most famous work.
New York, it's one of the world's true great megacities. You may know it from the silver screen. It was the set and backdrop for Martin Scorsese's film Taxi Driver. It was the background setting in Little Italy for The Godfather. It was Ghostbusters. There are so many Hollywood films of legend that have used Manhattan as their setting. Jay-Z, the billionaire rapper who once sold crack on the city streets below, calls it the Empire State. You might know it as the Big Apple, but whatever you know it as, it's one of the major urban centers of the world. It never ceases to amaze me when I'm returning to New York. The energy, no matter where you go in the city, there's always noises, smells, and millions of people walking around. No matter what time, day or night, no matter what, whether it's Chinatown, Little Italy, Uptown, Midtown, the Bronx, the East Village, Soho, Tribeca, any of the neighborhoods, there's always something happening. It's kind of irresistible. It was one of the reasons why I absolutely loved my 3 years living here. And it never ceases to amaze me and connect with me whenever I come back. I've got to make a note to come back more often. Maybe even spend several months a year here working on my film projects. New York, New York, the most populous city in the entire United States. It's been given many nicknames, including the city that never sleeps, Empire City, and Gotham. But probably the most famous one of all is the Big Apple. The nickname the Big Apple originated in the 1920s in reference to the prizes, or Big Apples, rewarded at the many racing courses in and around New York City. However, it wasn't officially adopted as the city's nickname until 1971 as the result of a successful ad campaign intended to attract tourists. Throughout its history, the term Big Apple has always come down to simply mean the best and the biggest of places to be, and New York City has long lived up to its nickname. And once you visit this 7-mile-long city, you'll truly understand why it's called the capital of the world and the Big Apple. Just a note on how New York City came to be. It was way back in 1624, and an opportunistic Dutchman who came across some passing Indians conducted a transaction for the sale of the entire Manhattan Island for just $24. Now that's a pretty good deal when you consider that, I guess, the Empire State Building alone would be worth hundreds of billions and billions of dollars. And if you aggregate the various boroughs, of which there are hundreds in New York, everything from Wall Street in the very south to Harlem in the north,
Midtown, Tribeca, the Village, Soho, the East Village, Chinatown, Little Italy, the Theatre District, the Garment District, the Diamond District. All of those places with their remarkable buildings and skyscrapers everywhere would have to be worth trillions and trillions and trillions in today's money. So buying the entire island back then for $24 seems to be a pretty good deal. But in fact, it wasn't quite that way, because the Indians that he purchased it off didn't really lay claim or have title to the land. They were just passing through. But in the spirit of turning a quick buck, it's an ethos that stayed with Manhattan right to today.
This magical place, New York City, holds a deep and special personal connection to me. It was my home in my mid-20s when I was transferred here from Melbourne, Australia, and it came to be, in my memory, a very magical place. It's one of the true megacities of the world. There may be cities who are more populated, like Tokyo, cities even with bigger skylines, like Shanghai. But to me, New York City will always be the ultimate urban experience. Freezing cold in the winter, blazing hot and humid in the summer, it's a city of contrasts, a city of extremes. From the incredible wealth of the richest 1% to the extreme poverty of the homeless, begging for coins on pretty much every street corner. It's the home of mega department stores, many of the world's most major corporate offices. And believe it or not, close to 50% of everything that has ever entered the United States, be that goods and services or people, came through Manhattan Island, right past the City of Liberty. And here it sits on Manhattan Island, wedged between the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the continent of the United States on the other. It's a very important place in the scheme of things for the world of culture, commerce, and the arts. New York is a city, it's also a state. And contrary to what many people have thought, New York City is actually the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, where I am at the moment. The Bronx, which is uptown, Staten Island, which is south, past the Statue of Liberty, and then you have Queens and Brooklyn to the east. And here on this 8-mile island, wedged between the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the continent of the United States to the west, is Manhattan, an island of over 10 million people, many of whom commute to the city each day and leave every evening. It's only 8 miles long and probably 2.5 miles wide, and it holds some of the most expensive real estate in all the world, the Big Apple.
I'm here just across the road from the famous Empire State Building in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. Midtown is considered to be the major corporate centers, unless you're in Wall Street, which is another corporate center. It's also where Times Square is, with all the Broadway theaters and the like. New York City, or New York, for those that don't know, is not only New York City, it's also a state that runs right up almost to the borders of Canada. But New York City is comprised of 5 boroughs. The borough of Manhattan, where I am at the moment, the Bronx, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Queens. And you can see in the background that ubiquitous mist piping out of that red and white column, which has always fascinated me, because it's almost like there's some evil lurking beneath the city, or some alien force. Maybe there is. Maybe they're transformers or something there. According to the 2020 census, there are 9 million inhabitants of New York City. That's one person, one child, has been born here every 4.5 minutes for the last several years. And you wonder what kind of a world they're being born into. For America, New York is utterly crucial. It's an island suspended between the Atlantic and the American continent. And it's estimated that nearly 50% of everything that comes into America comes in through the various ports of New York City.
Take me back to old Yazoo. Everything up here is new. I can't stand it, just must land it. Going back to old Yazoo. Everything you do, people got their eyes on you. It's compelling, yeah, me yelling. Going back to old Yazoo.
New York City was also known to be the home of the skyscraper. Now that's changed a little bit in recent history with all the things that are happening in Asia and the Middle East. But the building behind me, when it was launched or opened to the public in 1932, was the tallest building in the world. And at over 100 stories high, it's quite fascinating to know how it was built back then with the technology that they had. It was very much mechanical. They would weld hot rivets, molten hot rivets that were heated on site up in the heavens, and they would throw them to each other and then hammer them into the steel I-beams that form the structure that stands today. And when 9/11 was happening, you can imagine that was probably one of their prime targets. But thankfully, that classic, probably America's and maybe the world's most famous building, stood. It's a temple, a living monument to the art of Art Deco, and it's been faithfully restored, maintained, and now a centre of tourism, and visitors from all over the world flock there to marvel at the actual engineering feat, and also its place in the centre of Manhattan, which you get a pretty good vantage point. You don't get quite up to the top, but you get to the 85th floor, and it's well worth a trip.
View from the 80th floor. This is where the first elevator takes you. And you go around the corner and you get on another elevator. And this is the view going downtown where the World Trade Center is, the new one, Wall Street, Statue of Liberty, etc. We're on the 80th floor. Still a way to go to the top of what was once the world's tallest building. This little diorama is quite cool. Do you know what it would have been like back then? Someone gets an idea that in the 1920s you're going to build what must have been considered to be an impossible engineering feat. And this is the way that it actually was built up. I know they do that time-lapse thing, it's very tripped up. Obviously it's an animation. Where were you in 1931, I wonder? And so they did it, they welded the hot metal rivets on the spot. What a job.
the hordes of people from all around the world that came to New York City in what is the world's greatest migration in history were greeted by not only the Lady of Liberty, but by the many skyscrapers that adorn the New York skyline. The Empire State Building, the world's probably most famous building, was completed in 1932. It was put together by hand, banging in hot rivets that were actually melted on site, some 100 stories above the ground below.
One of the most loved films ever made about New York youth gangs is The Warriors. This 1979 fictional drama plays out in the subways of New York, from Coney Island to the infamous Bronx. A street gang known as the Warriors must fight their way from the Bronx to their home turf on Coney Island, when they are falsely accused of assassinating a respected gang leader, and it's all played out on the subways. The New York City subway system has been an iconic representation of American metropolitan transportation since its opening in 1904. Subways provide a solution to crowded cityscapes. They offer a cheaper alternative to cabs and cars and Ubers, which place the cost of petrol, gasoline, parking and insurance on one commuter instead of many, and allow people to live in one borough and work in another. Woven into books, movies and popular culture over its 100-year existence, the New York City subway system has bled into the other areas of history while simultaneously creating its own. Graffiti artists began taking over the New York City subways in the 1970s. Violence increased as well, and robberies and assaults on the subway were commonplace. By the 1980s, more than 250 felonies were committed on the subway each week. Fear caused a decline in ridership, especially among middle-class commuters who could afford other means of transportation. Unfortunately, fewer riders meant less money for the transportation system, money that could have hired more security staff or cleaned up some of the omnipresent graffiti. It would take a citywide effort to combat crime, to improve subway conditions.
Now, there ain't nothing more New York than rocking the subways. Here I am entering the subway. Here we are on 23rd Street, going up to 42nd Street. If you want to get around New York City, you got to do the subways. One thing about being in New York, you want to move around the city like a New Yorker, you got to know how to use the subway system. Pretty loud, huh?
When I lived there 20 years ago, New York City was racked with crime, murders, burglaries, drug deals, car thefts, thefts from cars. Remember the signs in car windows advising no radio? Unlike many cities' crime problems, New York's were not limited to a few inner-city neighbourhoods that could be avoided. Bryant Park, in the heart of Midtown on 42nd Street, and adjacent to the New York Public Library, was an open-air drug market. Grand Central Terminal a gigantic flophouse, the Port Authority bus terminal, a grim gauntlet for bus passengers dodging beggars, drunks, thieves, and destitute drug addicts, as the New York Times put it in 1992. In July 1985, the Citizens Crime Commission of New York published a study showing widespread fear of theft and assault in downtown Brooklyn, Fordham Road in the Bronx, Jamaica Center in Queens. Riders abandoned the subways in droves, fearing assault from lunatics and gangs. Vigilante groups like the Guardian Angels popped up to patrol the subway.
We are going to do what we can in a non-violent way without having any weapons available to us whatsoever to curb this violent crime that is on a continuous rampage throughout the system.
And yet violence does attend some of your patrols. I mean, you get into scrapes, no question about it.
Definitely. But remember, you're not dealing with the logical mind out there. You're dealing with an individual who's very basic, who only knows two things: rip off or be ripped off.
But it wasn't Sliwa's Guardian Angels who cleaned up the subways. Only when a range of agencies and institutions began to work on restoring public order did real progress begin. By the early 1990s, these highly visible successes, especially in the subway, had begun to express themselves politically. And better than any other politician, Rudy Giuliani understood the pent-up demand for public order and built his successful 1993 run for mayor on the quality of life themes. And once in office, he appointed Bratton, who had orchestrated the subway success and understood the importance of order maintenance as New York's police commissioner. Today, the New York City subway is not perfect, but it's not a warrior-style war zone it once was either.
It's like this next ride up to 42nd Street could be a little bit crowded. But the subway is easily the best way to get around New York City. If you don't do the subways, then you don't really get anywhere, not quickly at least. I mean, traffic is a gridlock. You can't really walk because it's too long. Bicycles, you can do that. You can get those crowdsourced bikes, but the subway is the bomb. And here's my train now. The 23rd Street subway.
I developed a particular penchant for the Egyptology section, which they had some incredible pieces and installations. But today I'm going to go in and have a look at the antiquity section at the Met.
It's lunchtime and I'm hungry. I'm gonna go to a place that I've been dying to check out. It's called Eataly. It's a massive complex celebrating all things fabulously Italian, like a big market, like a Bloomingdale's about all things Italian. Mario Batali used to be behind it. I'm not sure if he still is. Anyway, it's just down on Fifth Avenue. Obviously, this is the fresh market. It looks pretty cool. Prosciutto on the right. And yes, it's massive. The rosé bar. Certainly gives a step up to the David Jones food court. That's where they make the pasta. It's like a little maze full of fresh seafood. I'm here at Eataly, which is just off Fifth Avenue. And I've parked myself at a tasting station where they're making pasta fresca, and they have wine flights from all the different regions of Italy. I've chosen Dolcetta d'Alba, which I believe is a Barolo area. Ironically, I'm going to be in Tuscany in 2 weeks. So this is kind of an appetizer for my Italian adventure, which I'm training from Paris all day, which is like 11-hour flight. But I like trains. I like looking out the window, especially when you're in Europe. You know, you get a big loaf of bread, a baguette, maybe some jambon, saucisson, and while away the time sipping red wine. And here is my agnolotti, freshly made in front of me on the bench. And there's bread too. Awesome. I would like some Parmigiano, yes. Action, cue the Parmesan cheese.
What is the pasta without cheese?
Basta, grazie. No, I'm all set. I've got my wine, there's pasta, and I'm starving. I'd like to thank Mario Batali for making this possible. Thank you, Mario. You could use to lose a few pounds. Maybe steer clear of this place for a while.
New York has one of the most ethnically diverse populations on the planet. It is said there are more than 170 languages spoken in the 6 boroughs. And every few blocks, there seems to be a new ethnic enclave where a different cultural background congregates, i.e. Little Italy, Chinatown, Little Odessa, Spanish Harlem, Koreatown. You get my drift.
I'm here in Little Italy, downtown New York. You'll know the setting from probably a million different period pieces like The Godfather and a lot of Mario Scorsese's films. Little Italy. When New York was settled, it was a town of refugees. Obviously the Dutch bought it off the indigenous Indians for some paltry amount, $40 I think it was. But it was never really theirs, they were just passing through. And right since the city became settled, it became a city of gangs, the gangs of New York. Another one of Scorsese's most famous films with Leo DiCaprio. But the gangs were of various ethnic backgrounds, and one of the popular ones that became popular right through till after World War II were the Italians that emigrated from the south of Italy. And they set up here in Little Italy, which is ironically right next to Chinatown. It's an amazing place and quite incongruous how it could be so authentically, but not, Italian, yet here in downtown New York. It's going to be a lot of caloric killers all along here. Definitely an Italian carb fest. I think the Americans, when they interpreted the Italian cuisine, they got part of it right, but the other part was very strangely distorted. And the food is just so big. All the pizzas are so puffy, the pastry is so overwhelmingly designed to give you a heart attack. And then there's some strange hybrids between Mexican, Italian, God knows what. It's definitely some weird world cuisine. Here I am in Chinatown, literally one block over from Little Italy. The markings, the food stalls, the signage, everything changes from Italian to like downtown Shanghai, like a market or something. Again, jammed up against each other, divided by Canal Street. One side is Little Italy, the other side is Chinatown. How funky is that? And right across the street from Canal Street is Little Italy. Little Italy's that way, Chinatown is this way. You walk one block across the pedestrian crossing, and all of a sudden you're immersed into another brand new world. The markings have changed, the food stalls and stands have all changed. It's all full of Chinese people. And the story goes by taxi drivers that the famous NYPD will not set foot inside Chinatown because it's run by the Chinese triads and gangs. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I wouldn't put it past what goes on in the crazy city of New York. The Chinese seem to be one of the cultures of the world that have established a foothold pretty much everywhere on the planet. There doesn't seem to be a place in the remotest corners of the world where you can't find the ubiquitous Chinese signage with ducks strung on string and lap chong and all other kinds of weird, I don't know, weird but lovely, delicious Chinese delicacies. Just like in New York City.
I think there's a lot of people that are neglected in art. I don't know because if it's who made the paintings or what. But I don't know. Black people are never really portrayed realistically, and not even portrayed in modern art enough. Just for a change, you know.
I soon figured out when living in New York in my 20s that what really made the city special weren't the monuments or skyscrapers, but rather the remarkable people who chose to live here. I learned that many people who I idealised at night happened to frequent the same places I did. I often rubbed shoulders with Andy Warhol and his friends like Jean-Michel Basquiat as they attended the same kind of clubs as I. It soon seemed normal seeing these kinds of pop culture figures out enjoying their lives. I learned that it is the remarkable people and the energy that they had that really made the place special. I remember one of Andy's quotes, which I've used on my FIB stationery kits. It goes, "Don't try and live forever. Rather, create something that will." And that leads me to the great Virgil Abloh.
I don't feel responsible to a preconceived notion of art. I feel more responsible to a community that is trying to change the tide or to sort of live in an optimistic society that art, design, music, and fashion actually change the world for the better.
I found such an inspiring figure, a force of nature, gone too soon, whose legacy will live on forever. I went to the Brooklyn Museum to see his Figures of Speech exhibition, the final exhibition that he got to curate. It was both sad and inspiring. Now, Virgil Abloh made a career out of questioning assumptions and subverting expectations. He was raised in the Chicago area by parents of Ghanaian descent who moved to the United States in the 1970s. Abloh was a trained architect, but later found his calling in fashion. Over the course of his career, he worked across many disciplines, collaborating with graphic and furniture designers, musicians, contemporary artists, as well as fellow fashion designers. In undertaking projects in new fields, he not only influenced the conversation within them, he also expanded their traditional audiences, reaching millions through social media. Virgil Abloh and his exhibition, his final exhibition, Figures of Speech, which I visited at the Brooklyn Museum, was an important undertaking. It offered an unprecedented survey of this artist's output over nearly two full decades. And it pulls back the curtain on his working processes. And I guess in the exhibition we can see many of the prototypes that how they were prepared and presented alongside finished works. There's art products, fashion designs, sneakers, and they reveal his myriad of inspirations from high art to signage to street culture. In the exhibition, prototypes are presented alongside finished works and his fashion designs, and they reveal his myriad of inspirations, from centuries-old paintings to contemporary signage, even construction sites. Running through the exhibition is an emphasis on dialogue, language, and quotation works, turning the objects he designed and the people he worked with into figures of speech. In November 28, 2021, Abloh died of a rare form of cancer whilst he was working on completing the exhibition. And this is like a wraparound mural by Virgil Abloh. Just like Warhol before him, he used pieces of his everyday observation and interest into what he wanted to express as art. There's political statements, there's racial messages. Ian Curtis of Joy Division, Miggs, Nigo, Usher, skateboarding, Axl Rose, George Michael, not sure who that is, Tony Hawk's, baseball, Nirvana's Nevermind, more Joy Division, Ian Curtis, the Pyramid from the Louvre, Apollo 13. It's Marc Jacobs and the Golden Arches. It's very Warhol-esque. He was amazing, Virgil Abloh. If only he could have lived longer. It's hard to think what he could have achieved. His is a legacy that engaged and inspired countless millions of people from all walks of life. He worked with people of high art, luxury businesses, all the way down to street art and street graffiti. He was a man of the people and a man of his time, and I don't think there has been somebody like Virgil since Andy Warhol probably started making waves. He will be sorely missed. I'm here outside the Brooklyn Museum, and it's Sunday afternoon. I just stepped out of the exhibition entitled Virgil Abloh, part of the Figures of Speech collection that they have here. And it was a very moving experience for me. I've been a fan of Virgil's for quite some time now. I mean, not only was he a great visionary, he was also he was also a reluctant social activist. He may not have meant to be changing the world around him, but in his own unique way, it's actually what he did. Part of Virgil's, I guess, unique thing was that he was obviously a very curious, creative mind. He was a keen observer from the things around him in culture. And as his career grew, he clearly sampled and referenced and fused many of the elements he saw in his urban day-to-day life into his art. To him, referencing low culture or urban culture, street culture, was just as legitimate as referencing high art, luxury culture. He didn't see a distinction and he couldn't understand why there would be one. So he fused the two together. His creative world was open and inclusive. He welcomed in people of different nationalities, different sexual persuasions, different racial backgrounds. He collaborated freely and created often, relentlessly. Can't believe how somebody like him would have done so much in such a short period of time. His background was in architecture. Then he moved into graphic art, working with Kanye West as the head of Kanye's advertising business, Donda. He was a DJ, he was a performer, he was a pioneer. And probably more than anything, I think the thing that Virgil will be remembered for is that he brought people into his collective and encouraged them and collaborated with them that maybe wouldn't have had the confidence or the opportunity to do it on their own. I've heard it said, probably by a taxi driver on this trip, that a person's life is often limited by choices and opportunities. Sometimes you don't have opportunities, so your choices are really irrelevant. But if you have choices and opportunities, anybody can do remarkable things. Virgil was very visible in terms of what he was inspired by. And I think the biggest legacy he's given us in these 40 years, gone too soon, when he showed people that would not have probably thought or dreamt of themselves being able to be in a position to do things like Virgil. People of color, people of different races, different sexual persuasions, people from low culture, from urban culture, from the street. He was the first designer who genuinely merged street culture with luxury culture. And there was never any force or cliche or contrivance in what he was doing. It all seemed effortless and it all seemed to make sense. He's left behind a massive body of work, but more importantly, I think he's left behind the message that people of varying types can do anything. Thank you for that, Virgil.
I could see at the time there was no way of knowing, falling leaves in the night.
Ralph Lauren started his fashion company in 1967 by selling slightly wider than usual neckties. He had big dreams, far more than neckties. He had a vision of creating a global empire, something no other American fashion brand had managed to do before. By the time the 1970s had rolled around, the two most recognizable brands on the entire planet were Coca-Cola and Marlboro cigarettes. They were literally everywhere. Both were quintessentially American brands, and both were brands that I worked for and with. Marlboro was the Philip Morris company that I worked with in New York, doing the Marlboro Country campaigns while I was there, and Coca-Cola was later a client of my agency. Coke became the real thing, and Philip Morris gave us Marlboro Country, and probably a whole lot of lung cancer to boot. Back then, in even the most remotest outposts on the planet, in any corner of the globe, wherever you found a shop selling things, a shack even, you would see advertising slogans for both those American brands, Coke and Marlboro. So right from the very beginning, Ralph's vision was to make his polo every bit the global brand as Coca-Cola was. Not content to just have it be a success in the United States. Ralph's plan was to make the Polo Ralph Lauren brand famous in every single country in the planet. And it was part of the reason why he constructed his unique business model, which I could tell you about. And to achieve that, Ralph knew exactly what the Coca-Cola company of Atlanta knew and the Philip Morris company of New York City knew. And they knew that he needed to enlist the power of advertising, of mass media. Like historically, fashion brands, or luxury fashion brands, had historically built their prestige and reputation off the back of their founder, their designer. Yves Saint Laurent, Christian Dior, Valentino. There was no advertising. Their business focus was really on design and presentation, maybe even some stores, but not on marketing. And the same design focus that went into each season's new collection, along with their flagship stores and the seasonal runway presentations for the press. Back when Ralph started, global advertising campaigns for fashion brands were pretty much unheard of. And now they're an established staple, something you have to have, and you have to have brilliant marketing to be a success today. Through the past 50 years, Ralph single-handedly reinvented the idea of the fashion business, and he did it with the power of marketing. And by doing so, he created the world's first global lifestyle brand.
Here's a Jewish guy, right? And like anglicized his name, Lipschitz. He's not a designer. He can't sketch. He can't do none of those things that would produce a good garment. And he completely revolutionized the fashion industry through marketing.
Polo alone is that brand of greatness. You feel distinguished. You might add $2 in your pocket, but you're looking like $1 million.
Now, while Ralph may have led the way in this new global marketing approach, fellow Bronx-born designer Calvin Klein was not far behind. Calvin Klein also showed that he was a savant when it came to marketing, and he too shared a drive to make his brand a global phenomenon. Now, I guess whilst not competing directly with one another, New York City was a small place, and there was undoubtedly a fierce rivalry between Ralph and Calvin. Both were the children of Jewish immigrants. Both grew up in the Bronx. Both were around the same age. They knew each other from school. And they both started their fashion companies around the same time. You could say that their rivalry was something like, I guess, the Beatles and the Stones. It was intense. And in the early days, both would trade campaign for campaign, each intensely aware of what the other was doing each season. And each season, they pushed each other further and higher and higher. And whilst their campaigns were radically different, what was really weird about it, they were both created by the same photographer, who was not just a photographer. He didn't just take the pictures. He was the creative director, art director, brand guardian, and that was Bruce Weber, the photographer. Genius.
The aesthetic before Bruce came was very sort of, for male models was very tall, thin, and Bruce changed that to be a much more athletic, much more, almost an American sensibility.
So in the early days when we were working with Bruce Weber and we were kind of readjusting or reimagining, what the new GQ was. And if you think about the 70s, it was literally the Peacock era. It was the Studio 54 era. It was a little bit more showy. There was more dazzle, so to speak. And it was also a very glamorous era. I know that it's one of my favorite eras to respond to. I mean, there was an idea of masculinity. There was an idea of macho that was very cool. And I know people like Tom Ford kind of, rest into that kind of inspiration. As do I. But the 80s were about realness, and it was about athleticism. And instead of choosing models, Bruce Weber, who was a huge influence on GQ's, journey at that moment, was really adamant about, going to the local colleges wherever we were shooting, or setting up castings that would happen before we got on set. And, he was really adamant about this idea of male masculinity, which was based around the athlete.
Bruce Weber's imagery, I didn't experience it when I was growing up. I found about him when I started to work in fashion a little bit later. It was very natural and sort of like not being too scared of being sexy.
More than this. Oh, there's nothing.
So Desire started to become well known for an agency that understood the fashion business and was able to craft and put together really great campaigns. So we became good at what we were doing and became known in that particular niche. We were approached by the people that procured the license for the Polo Ralph Lauren business to actually act as their agency in Australia, to which I was very excited about. Of course, we accepted with great joy and became the official marketing partner or agency of the Polo Ralph Lauren business in Australia, which we helped launch here. And we worked with them as a client for over a decade and helped build their business to become one of the most successful fashion brands and businesses in the whole country. So it was a really great opportunity. So in doing that, not only did I become more knowledgeable about Ralph Lauren and how they worked and met all their people, and never got to meet Ralph, although one of the other people in my business got to meet him several times, and got to really deeply understand how their advertising processes and how Bruce Weber and Ralph and Mary Randolph Carter, who was their art director, and how they actually put together these incredible campaigns and built these worlds, which is just like the way that Marlboro had done for Marlboro Country, about the detail and the attentiveness to all the different asset facts and everything. Everything was just perfection. They had a team of geniuses and they really cared about what they were doing. So we also launched the Hugo Boss business, which is one of the most famous global fashion brands as well. And we had them as a client for over a decade. Weirdly enough, we even had the Calvin Klein business as a client for a while. So suffice to say, I learned a lot about fashion marketing during that time, fashion imaging, fashion brand creation, and it became a huge personal passion and interest for me, and it still is to this day, even though I'm more making films these days. But it helped develop a deep personal connection and respect for the genius of Ralph Lauren and his people and his company and what he's managed to achieve, taking a business from nothing, where he was selling neckties out of a suitcase and built it into a fortune, close to $10 billion. I have a deep respect for him and also the people in the Ralph Lauren company and their ability
to create these genius marketing campaigns for such an extended period of time. You know, to me, Ralph Lauren is without question the king of New York City. He grew up in a relatively poor section of the Bronx, and the Bronx is a tough kind of place. It's one of the 5 boroughs of New York. And he's worked himself up from, you know, $0 to a fortune of close to 10 billion. And it's really like a Disney-esque rags to riches kind of fable. You know, the businessman, he served in the army, he worked as a clerk before he made his fortune with the Polo Clothing Company, which he established in 1968. Most people will know this, that Ralph wasn't born Ralph Lauren. He actually was born Ralph Lipschitz in the Bronx in New York City. And his parents, Frank and Fradel, they'd immigrated to the United States from war-torn Europe. And their family included 4 children, one of whom was called Ralph. And despite having to share a bedroom with his 2 brothers and having to grow up in cramped living quarters, Ralph has what he considers to be a joyful childhood. When Ralph was a teenager, he was well known for his one-of-a-kind sense of style, and he was drawn to looks made famous by movie stars and sporting icons. The individual style of actors from Hollywood like Fred Astaire and Cary Grant served as a source of motivation for him. Even though Ralph was short and he had dark sort of Jewish features, he romanticized, you know, being like Cary Grant. And Ralph's deep love of clothes led him to get a job in a fashion-related business to support his interests and also make some money. And as a result, he got a job at Brooks Brothers. And he would have learnt a lot about the styling and putting looks together because they're a very classic, conservative menswear company making tailored clothing. And that would augur well for his future. So after completing his high school education and getting a diploma, he enrolled in a business program at Barrett College in Manhattan. He attended the school for 2 years before deciding that he was not interested to complete that. He was called up for the military service in 1962, and his entire life was turned upside down. After the 2 years, he came back and he tried to get back into the business he had before, which is the fashion industry. In 1964, shortly after Ralph's discharge from the military, he wed his future wife, Ricky Ann Lowe Beer, and the couple went on to have 3 children together. He has never failed to emphasize the significance of pursuing one's dreams. He once made a remark about how people frequently question him about his inspiration behind his ideals. To which he said, "Does it have to have anything to do with my ethnicity, my wealth, or my background? It's connected to our waking fantasies," he said. And in the course of Ralph's business practices, he's repeatedly demonstrated that he didn't need to come from a rich or privileged family to achieve his success. Ralph Lauren began his career with the straightforward intention of designing garments that he would like to wear. And he was dissatisfied with the trends in men's fashion at the time, so he made the decision to make garments for himself. And he turned it into a career path in the process. From humble beginnings, in 1967, Ralph was operating out of a one-room office in the Empire State Building, where he had a suitcase full of ties that were just a little bit thicker than usual. And in addition to selling his ties from the drawer, Ralph went on store to door, trying to peddle his wares to customers. And he famously got a contract from an early days with Bloomingdale's, which really catapulted him into the next sphere. So he pursued his passion for fashion. He even established a clothing line in addition to the ties, and things began to fire up and fly. He established the Polo brand, which not only marketed clothing, but a certain way of life. And when asked about the Ralph Lauren brand, Ralph made the following statement. He said, "The clothes that I design and everything I've done is about life and how people live, and how they want to live and how they dream they want to live. And that's the kind of work I do." Ralph is of the opinion that one of the reasons for his success, that he has style and does not follow fashion. He's famous for saying, "Fashion fades away so quickly, style is forever." And he is one of a kind. As I mentioned earlier, I was sent to live in New York City when I was in my mid-20s as an international brand management trainee for the then all-powerful Philip Morris Corporation, who were the world's biggest and most successful consumer products group. Not only did they have all these cigarette brands like Marlboro, but they also owned Miller Beer, 7-Up soft drinks, and they bought the foods companies or conglomerates of Kraft and General Foods. They were massive. And as well as living here for 3 years back in the day, it's also a city I have been returning to frequently for over 3 decades. When I lived in New York the first time, it was pre the AIDS crisis, and New York was pumping. It was after the Studio 54 era, but nightclubs were ever present. Rap and hip-hop was exploding out of the Bronx in the north, and downtown, the art scene and party scene, presided over by icons like Andy Warhol, were booming. Glam clubs, straight or gay, seemed to operate 24/7, around the clock, and the whole city seemed as if electrified. Now, another club that has probably not been given as much press as Studio 54, but is equally as fascinating to my view, was the club called Area. Area was influenced equally by 60s era happenings and the gonzo childhood of its proprietors. Area opened its doors in 1983, and the club, unlike any club that came before it, it underwent a painstaking reinvention or makeover every 6 weeks, with themes like confinement, suburbia, science fiction, that incorporated elaborate art installations with taxidermied bears, live monitor lizards, people getting enemas. It was very out there. And the dramatics spilled out onto Hudson Street outside, where desperate crowds, and sometimes there could be as many as 700-800 people, all waving their hands. There was never a line. The way you got in was you were picked from the crowd by the doorman, and you were escorted in. You could stay there all night. In fact, some people did, returning week after week, never to be let in. But they were still desperate to get behind the velvet rope. Inside, bonked out celebrities, and they were mingled with the normal kind of civilians. Bianca Jagger watched Ed Koch work out. Sting partied with Donny Osmond. Grace Jones refused to use the coat room. Instead, someone followed behind her, coat in hand. Eventually, times changed, and competition from other venues thinned Area's dance floor. Or maybe they just got worn out with this whole reinvention thing after a few years. People always measure the success of a thing by its longevity. The owner, Eric Good, was quoted, but the entire point of Area was its impermanence. And that's why the celebrities kept coming back, because you knew it was a fleeting moment you were able to get a glimpse of. And just after 4 years after it opened, it closed. There was Dolph Lundgren at Area's confinement theatre party. There was no line to get in. You had to be picked out of the throng. JF Kennedy Jr. waiting to get inside the club. The special invitations for the opening of Natural History. New theme openings were always the hottest ticket in town. A human fountain at the Gardens party, and Jennifer Good said, "That's not actual pee, it's water, see the tube." And there was Andy Warhol standing alight his piece, invisible sculpture for the art party, and Keith Haring at work. Now, Bernard Zett, who worked at Area for 2 years and played approximately 73 characters, including Jackie O, for the fashion party. The club had a mini swimming pool, where people often were in.
more like a toddler's pool. Eric Good, owner, and Madonna. And there's some pictures of models, artists, their friends taken in the photo booth in the bathroom. The centre strip, Jennifer Good with John Michael Basquiat. Yeah, amazing memories.